Note, as in my example from a moment ago, profit and loss could be measured in money, but if we like, we could measure it subjectively. Some business people might just get enjoyment out of doing what they do, being your own boss, making an exciting product. There's some sort of adventure in being engaged in business activity. We could count that as part of the profit, part of the reward, even if it isn't monetized. In the Austrian conception, profit is not a rate of return, as in the neoclassical theory of the firm. And you have this notion that, well, there's a normal rate of profit in an industry, and if a firm is earning more than that normal rate of profit, it must be doing something bad. It must be a monopoly. The government should do something, with antitrust or regulation or whatever. In the Austrian concept, profit is not a rate that's sort of earned normally by everyone, right? Profits and losses are amounts, and they vary according to the individual entrepreneur, according to the business, according to the market, circumstances, time and place, and so on. What are these resources that the entrepreneur possesses? Well, they can be, machines, tools, computers, etc., land, natural resources. Time can be considered a resource, the opportunity cost of one's time, one's own body, and so on. An interesting passage in Mises, he points out, he says, in using the term entrepreneur, Mises says, nobody thinks of shoeshine boys, cab drivers who own their cars, small businessmen, and small farmers, because we all think of Bill Gates, right? Still, what economics establishes with regard to entrepreneurs is rigidly valid for all members of the class without any regard to temporal and geographical conditions and to the various branches of business. What Mises means is the shoeshine boy who sets up his little shop and has to purchase the materials and so on and hope that he can earn enough money from shining shoes to cover his costs. The small businessman, the small farmer, and so on are all entrepreneurs because the rewards that they get are not guaranteed. Their returns are not certain. They are business actors under conditions of uncertainty. So they earn profits or losses, okay? Now, Mises' discussion of the entrepreneur it has some subtlety to it and some complexity. There's some ambiguity or nuance. Mises also refers to a specific class of entrepreneur, what he calls the entrepreneur, or what we might call the entrepreneur promoter. Let me quote from Mises. Economics also calls entrepreneurs those who are especially eager to profit from adjusting production to the expected changes in conditions. Those who have more initiative, more venturesomeness, and a quicker eye than the crowd, the pushing and promoting pioneers of economic improvement. He calls these actors or these agents promoters. In other words, we might define a special class of entrepreneur that not only employs scarce means under conditions of uncertainty in hopes of achieving definite ends, but also is particularly eager, has extra initiative, is creative, is ambitious, pushes and promotes the market. And these are the kind of individuals that we think of when we think of Bill Gates or Thomas Edison or John D. Rockefeller and so on. The ones whose actions are really, really important. Okay? So you might say, well, Klein is an entrepreneur because he does, I do some consulting projects and I have to pay for my time and materials, and some firms might pay me and I might earn a little profit or a little loss in my consulting business. So technically speaking, I'm an entrepreneur. Any consulting income that I earn would be classified by economic science as profit, or if it's the opposite, loss. Nonetheless, I'm not exactly what you would call an important entrepreneur. In other words, my actions in the market do not sort of move the economy the way that the actions of Steve Jobs move the economy, or Bill Gates, or Warren Buffett, or whoever you want to name, or Helio, right? So Helio is an entrepreneur whose actions really have a big impact on life and culture and the economy of Brazil. I'm technically an entrepreneur, but I'm not a promoter, okay? I'm just not a very important kind of entrepreneur, but that's okay. I can live with that. So what are these promoters like? Well, they own, substantial amounts of capital. They're particularly alert to opportunities to make money on their capital. They're creative, they're good leaders, and so on. Notice, this is not a purely praxeological concept. The concept of the promoter is a slightly more loosely defined, historically contingent category. So we can look at Steve Jobs or Helio and say, okay, he's a promoter, but it's not a strict praxeological category in the same sense of as laborer or entrepreneur more generally. Okay? So when we think about promoter entrepreneurs, we're really bringing together the entrepreneur function and the capitalist function. So in practice, the capitalist and the entrepreneur are one and the same. So under conditions of uncertainty, those who own capital earn not only interest due to time preference, but also they earn profit or loss because they invest their capital under conditions of uncertainty. So what is the business firm? Well, if you like, it's the nexus in which the capitalist function and the entrepreneur function come together. It's a very important subject, so important that there is a recent book that I urge you to buy called The Capitalist and the Entrepreneur, Essays on Organizations and Markets, which is available outside in the lobby. And you can probably get a signature, an autographed copy if you're lucky, that explains sort of the theory of the business firm by bringing together the capitalist and the entrepreneur. Why is Austrian economics particularly useful or insightful in understanding the capitalist and the entrepreneur together? Well, there are many important concepts, Austrian insights, the notion of capital resources as heterogeneous, fundamental to the Austrian theory of capital, right? If all resources were identical, then it would not take very much entrepreneurial skill. It would not take much skill as a promoter to combine them and organize them and use them to earn profits. Anybody could do it. But resources are, in fact, heterogeneous and subjectively perceived by entrepreneurs, as emphasized by the Austrian school. This is why the act of combining resources is a very important skill that not everyone possesses. Okay? Production takes time, as emphasized by the Austrian theory of production and the business cycle and so on. Entrepreneurs engage in economic calculation. So economic calculation, as defined by Mises, is not simply an economy-wide issue that central planners cannot perform and so on. Economic calculation is the tool used by entrepreneurs as they forecast future revenues and compare them against present costs. And of course, there is competition in the market as the market selects for entrepreneurial skill. Those who are consistently good at entrepreneurship are able to attract, they earn profits, they're able to increase their capital stock and have an even greater effect on the allocation of resources in the market. Those who are unsuccessful find themselves competed out, and they eventually exit the market. Okay? In the interest of time, I'm going to skip some material on more specific. Within the Austrian literature, there are some differences. For example, Kerzner has this notion of entrepreneurship as alertness, what I view as close to Mises' notion of the promoter. Schumpeter, sort of Austrian fellow traveler, emphasized entrepreneurship as innovation. I judge Mises to be closer to Frank Knight, who developed a concept of entrepreneurship as judgment, which I discuss in my book. As Lachman put it in Capital and Its Structure, we are living in a world of unexpected change. Hence, capital combinations will ever be changing, will be dissolved and reformed. In this activity, we find the real function of the entrepreneur. So in a market economy, the real function of the entrepreneur is this combining and recombining of heterogeneous capital resources under conditions of uncertainty. Now, there are a number of applications, extensions that one might wish to discuss that I cover in some of my works. I have a new book that will be coming out later this year called Entrepreneurial Judgment and the Theory of the Firm. It's just at the final manuscript stage with the publisher, where, among other things, my co-author Nikolai Foss and I discuss how Mises' notion of entrepreneurship extends to the large firm. And we argue that large firms can also be entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurship is not exclusively a property of the small firm or the young firm. It's not just about startups. More complex, hierarchical, mature companies also act entrepreneurially and have special ways of trying to make their organizations more entrepreneurial. So we discuss, for example, the notion of the multi-person firm as a nested hierarchy of entrepreneurial judgment. I have some quotations about that, which I'll skip. So the very last thing I want to say, is entrepreneurship something that the government should try to promote, encourage? Is government intervention harmful or helpful to entrepreneurship? Well, I won't keep you in suspense any longer. It's mostly harmful, okay? I don't want to shock anyone here coming to an Austrian conference, but government intervention has a number of harmful effects on entrepreneurship. In the macroeconomic sense, which other speakers will discuss in more detail, right? Credit expansion and the creation of inflation, money inflation leading to price inflation, not only has undesirable consequences in the aggregate, sort of lengthening the structure of production, setting in motion the business cycle, and so on, but from a more microeconomic perspective, monetary expansion, credit expansion, also distorts the signals of profit and loss that are essential for the entrepreneurial mechanism.